Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to the Keiser Report. Markets, finance, and scandals, and robot traders terrorizing Wall Street and the American and global economy. Let's bring in Stacy Herbert. Stacy Herbert, tell us more.
Max Keiser, well, it is summer, and summer is often the time of sequels. So this brings me to the first headline, Deflationary Black Hole, the Sequel. Who will Wall Street send to Congress to extort $15 trillion this time? Yes, they're back, but before I start that story, I want to set the scene.
Yeah, set the scene.
Unhappy robber. Gunman calls restaurant to gripe. So this is a restaurant in Atlanta, Georgia, and a man who robbed a Wendy's at gunpoint last week apparently was so upset with his haul that he called twice to the restaurant to complain afterward. He said, quote, "Next time, there better be more than $586.
Well, this is brilliant. I see where you're going with this. It's brilliant because if the man were Hank Paulson and he was in front of Congress, they would have given him $700 billion. You see, but because he's not a partner at a Wall Street firm, he's an untouchable in America's society. He's an underling. He's part of the serf class.
Yes, but as we also see the setup for a second heist of the American population, it's a trickle-down mood that they can get away with it. Like, this guy obviously feels that it's okay and it's acceptable to just call and complain about how little you got the first time. We only got $700 billion the first time. We want $1 trillion or $2 trillion.
I think that's a good point. The Wall Street bankers are setting the moral agenda in the American landscape, and there's no leadership in White House to counter that with any kind of moral leadership whatsoever. They've outsourced their morality to Wall Street, and Wall Street, of course, is a cesspool.
Well, that brings us to the main headline, Deflationary Black Hole, the Sequel. Who will Wall Street send to Congress to extort $15 trillion this time? This is a headline from you, but you're talking about two headlines here. IMF, U.S. real estate sector could bring banking crisis 2.0, and banking system on verge of new crisis, according to a hedge fund manager in the UK. So this is the hedge fund manager in the UK is Noster Capital, and they've taken a massive short positions against a bunch of European banks because, first of all, they believe that the so-called stress tests on the banks here were totally bogus, that there aren't, for example, 6% of Tier 1 capital in these banks, but actually less than 2%.
Well, what got the whole crisis started was a collapse in the real estate market as a result of Wall Street Ponzi finance scheming. And to try to clean up all that bad mortgage paper, Washington and the Federal Reserve did a deal where they put onto the Federal Reserve balance sheet trillions of dollars of bad debt. Turns out that bad debt is even worse than they thought. And there's another many more trillion on the bank's balance sheet. So we're going to talk about another down leg in the real estate market. China, by the way, their stress tests assume a 60% markdown in real estate. They're doing real stress tests. But the U.S. and the U.K. and these European banks are not doing real stress tests. So another huge down leg for real estate, which means, as you point out, another huge extortionary confrontation with Congress for another 10 to 15 trillion in money to bail out these guys.
But the IMF and then this hedge fund in the UK are saying the biggest danger is, however, the U.S. housing market. And we've warned about this for quite a while, too, because, remember, it was the subprime mortgage crisis that happened first. And those were the very bottom of the mortgage lending ranks. And now the next leg is the Alt-A, it's called. These are, also liar loans, but they're from the upper middle class, allegedly upper middle class. So they were allowed to have bigger mortgages. And these, you could see in the charts here that Credit Suisse in February was warning. And you see the charts, we're in that very first rise up. And then there's a little bit of a lull towards the end of the year in terms of resets on these mortgages. But next year you see this giant Everest-like mountain of resets coming.
The fault is with the banks, not the people borrowing the money. If the casino, who has given you chips to go bet, if they take your money and they bet it on some global casino racket, the derivatives market, and they lose money, it's not for the casino then to go back to the customer where they stole the money from to begin with and tell them that's their fault and to beat them up and to steal more of their money. No, they made the mistake. These Wall Street banks and these Washington politicians who stole the money from the retail borrower to begin with and then blew it on the global derivatives casino exchange they're now saying, well, it's the fault of the people who borrowed the money to begin with. No, it's not their fault. It's your fault because you're an idiot for having stolen the money to begin with and then blowing it, gambling on the global derivatives market. You're a derivative-aholic. You're a gambleaholic. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, BNP Paribas, Deutsche Bank, the whole lot of you. You should all go into rehab because you're gambleaholics and be just locked up for years until you learn to overcome your gambling addiction.
Well, Max, another sign that we may be about to encounter a second heist of the U.S. taxpayer is this headline. Market data firm spots the tracks of bizarre robot trader. Now, mysterious, impossible, nefarious trading algorithms are operating every minute of every day in the nation's stock exchanges. And this is according to this chart you see here. And this is compiled by Nanex, a data services firm that has put together all the background noise happening in the markets. And those are algorithms trading there.
That's right. Robot traders, algorithmic traders that are programmed to commit larceny in the name of neoliberalism or some other out-of-date ideology from the fundamentalist bankers on Wall Street who are willing to blow themselves up. They're suicide bankers. They use these are like drones. When they send the drones into Afghanistan or some other country and they just kill people without any regard to what they're doing. They're just blindly killing people. Wall Street has these robotic trading robots that are executing trades that are designed to steal money. They don't care who they steal the money from, even from themselves.
Yes, but Max, the article that we're discussing here, they speak to several professors at, say, UPenn, a very famous business school, and none of them could understand what this constant heartbeat-like thing is. Now, I have a theory that it's perhaps even the U.S. government just giving a heartbeat to the markets that are effectively dead. There's nothing there unless other than this artificial heartbeat.
Well, we know that 70% of the trading activity in the New York Stock Exchange is program trading. And all it is, they set up accounts and they have these robots trading with each other. And as I wrote about on a blog, you see, as part of this new model of holographic pricing, Wall Street first picks a price, and then they have the robots fill in the trades to get to that price. It's a complete opposite of free market capitalism where the buyers and the sellers come together and the result is the price. No, that's not the way it works anymore. Now the price is set first by the corrupt bankers on Wall Street. Then the buys and the sells are filled in by computers after the fact to make it look like that price is legitimate when it wasn't legitimate. It's a command and control, centrally planned kleptocracy run out of Wall Street in the City of London for a few people. It's killing society. It's killing the ecology.
But also, if you look again at this chart, like the constantness, the heartbeat-like quality of this, and I think perhaps you could look at maybe the May 6th flash crash, 1,000-point drop in the Dow as perhaps a forerunner to see how terrorized the population would be and what they would be willing to accept under those circumstances. So are you just being lulled into this false sense of a genuine, constant heartbeat that they could then pull the plug on, and it creates panic?
That's exactly what happened on May 6th. The computers went through a glitch. The buying and selling with each other evaporated, and stocks hit a vacuum and dropped 1,000 points in 15 minutes. So we've got a Frankenstein monster stalking the global economy that's programmed to commit larceny and to disrupt the economies around the world. For him, the robotic itself is without a conscience.
Nanex explains that there was actually another kind of test run on July 16th in a quiet hour before the markets even opened. Suddenly he saw a huge spike in bandwidth on his own system monitoring this algorithm there. When they looked at the data, they found that 84,000 quotes for each of 300 stocks had been made in under 20 seconds. He says, quote, "This all happened pre-market when volume is low. But if this kind of burst had come in at a time when we were getting hit hardest, I guarantee it would have caused delays in the central quotation system."
Well, examine that statement. They were doing trades, quote, before the market opens. Yeah. Okay, well, that's absurd. What do you mean before the market opens? The market opens and trading commences based on legitimate buyers and legitimate sellers looking to transact business. You can't have trades before the market opens unless you're using phantom traders, phantom money from the Fed, phantom money from the Treasury, and you're rigging the market like a casino, and you answer only to yourself, and you run the system out of Washington and Wall Street. Oh, and by the way, you're a psychotic gambleaholic with unlimited credit and 0% interest rates, and you pay nothing for commissions. And so it's amazing that Goldman Sachs doesn't make more money. I mean, given that circumstances, a rhesus monkey can make $1 billion just by hitting a button like this. You know, basically, what are they doing? It's just they're pleasuring themselves, you know, using the market as a mechanism to do so. It's absolutely pornography. It's financial pornography, as we've discussed on this show. These guys are basically the equivalent, morally, of the most aberrant elements of society. Lloyd Blankman should be going door to door and telling people in his neighborhood that he's a moral pornographer and a financial pornographer, and let people know in his neighborhood that somebody in their neighborhood lives in their neighborhood who's a financial pornographer.
Well, if you did mention Washington, and I have this final headline, Extend and Pretend, the Obama administration's failed foreclosure program. So, yes, it turns out that the Obama administration is using the exact same methodology of the Wall Street banks, basically accounting fraud. It's just extend and pretend. None of the bad debts have gone away. The monster is being kept alive by an algorithm that creates a false heartbeat.
Resecuritize the same ungodly mess of paper that they say has value of 100 cents on the dollar, but really is worth about 0 cents on the dollar. Just keep rolling it forward and pretending it's there. You know, it's like that huge toxic plastic waste dump in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Or how about the dead zone now in the Gulf of Mexico, thanks to BP? It's a financial dead zone that they keep rolling over, and Bernanke keeps rates near zero because he's part of the psychotic gang of financial terrorists, Ben Bernanke. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. When we come back, we'll be speaking with someone who actually has got some ideas for you to protect yourself against financial terrorism. So stay there.
Observe nature and discover its beauty. Communicate with the wild and learn. Test yourself and become free. See what nature can give you on RT.
Houses, apartments, cars, appliances. It's all yours until they come to visit you. Do you think the property bought on credit really belongs to you? Deep in Debt on RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Amsterdam to talk with Brekje van der Hek, a documentary filmmaker whose most recent film is Time for Change on VPRO International in the Netherlands. The film travels from Barcelona to Latvia to Jakarta to look at people responding to the banking crisis by taking matters into their own hands. I just saw the film again recently. It's really a remarkable piece of filmmaking. Welcome to the show, Brigitte.
Hi.
All right. Tell us about Time for Change. Why did you make it, and what did you discover along the way?
Well, it kind of started working on the project because I felt that some parts of the crisis, the economic crisis, were underreported. That we hear a lot about what's happening to financial institutions, to finance, but I think one of the things we don't hear so much about is what people are doing to kind of reinvent their life now that they don't trust financial institutions anymore. I think all over the world you see people taking initiatives and coming up with kind of alternative structures not to depend on financial institutions and on currencies anymore.
That's right. There is certainly a need to perpetrate a certain myth in terms of how the system can operate and can only operate in a certain way. And what the film discovers is that there are many ways to operate, crossing many different cultures, civilizations, and historically. Now, let's talk about what's going on in Jakarta. The gold dinar, the silver dirham. Very interesting because this is exactly what libertarians and Ron Paul in the United States are talking about. And the only real true example of it is in Islamic Jakarta. Tell us about it.
Right. Well, I think it's not the only example because worldwide, as you probably know, there are thousands of local currency systems that are trying to experiment with a currency that is not connected to the global financial system and that will work for a local community. But I was interested in the gold dinar and the silver dirham because they are connected to Islam, and Islam is not a marginal phenomenon, as we all know. You know, it's a 1 billion population worldwide, and in Jakarta, I met Zaim Saidi. He's a journalist, public affairs NGO worker. He's a thinker, and he's been working on this project for introducing the dirham and the dinar, so the gold and silver currency, in a kind of general matter based on Islamic thinking. And the idea is, for him, it's both political and religious. And he feels that now gold is too much in the hand of the rich people, and there's been a lot of inflation in Indonesia, so a lot of poor people are seeing paper money, working hard to earn a little bit of their paper money, but then as they sit on it, it's kind of not worth much anymore. After a year or two, it loses already 10-20% of it value. So what he's saying is, you know, why don't you buy gold currency, and why don't you buy silver currency? And that way, it will keep its value.
Right. So this debate in America right now between inflation and deflation, the Wall Street Journal recently saying basically that the deflation camp has won the day. But in other countries like in Jakarta, inflation, that is to say the debasement of the paper money, is running rampant. And exactly what you'd expect would happen is happening. The purchasing power is collapsing. And you find now some smart entrepreneurs have taken the role of what should be the central bank and taken it onto themselves. They've introduced their own gold and silver coins. This is what they use as a medium of exchange. They are maintaining their purchasing power, as the man in the film says, that the gold dinar could buy him, I believe it was 2 goats, going back several years, even 50 or 100 years. And today, that same gold dinar can still buy 2 goats. So in other words, the currency maintains its purchasing power, and it's right there alive in Jakarta. And as you point out, this is the remarkable thing, because Sharia law, Islamic law, has always looked down on usury, money lending.
I think I would just like to add, it's not just smart entrepreneurs trying to make an investment decision or help people, you know, think about where to store their surplus money. It's really also a kind of moral and political viewpoint tied to Islam and to the Quran, which says that money should not be virtual. Money is exchange value. It should be used to exchange goods rather than, you know, virtual realities. And so also this idea of usury, which you mentioned, it's very strong in Islam, that money cannot be used to make more money. You know, money is just a means of exchange. So in bringing in the gold and the silver standard again, he's saying, look, this is what money is. It should be used to exchange goods. It's just a means, not an end in itself. So it has a moral and a political connotation as well.
Yes, it's remarkable because right there in the United States Constitution, it says no money shall be of any medium other than gold and silver. It's hard-coded because America revolted against Britain to get away from the Bank of England, to get away from fractional reserve funny money. That's part of the reason, as Ben Franklin said, the primary reason that they started the United States of America. Now they're enslaved by a Federal Reserve System that's not even owned by America. It's owned by foreign interests. And now, of course, in America, the entire Islamic culture and religion has been completely vilified. But as you point out, in the Quran, they say things that are exactly in the U.S. Constitution. They recognize gold and money as the only viable medium of exchange that will prevent the kind of Ponzi scheme, market manipulation, insider trading we see on Wall Street in the City of London, perpetrated by the schnooks and the schnooks, associates down there at the various banks that we always talk about. So it's remarkable to me that Ron Paul, if he were really to be honest, is adhering to the tenets of the Quran.
Exactly. And also interest. It's not allowed to charge interest in Quranic law.
Exactly. And this is interesting also in the Islamic world because to try to keep up with various banks around the world, they've called in the mullahs to try to interpret Quranic law to see whether they couldn't create derivatives to to go with that. So there's a market for mullahs to try and look at this stuff. But one of the reasons why these banks, these Islamic banks, sailed through the crisis of the past 2 or 3 years is because, for this very reason, they weren't stacked up with all these hundreds of billions and trillions in derivatives. Now let's move on. Regarding these parallel banking systems, the analyst you speak to in the film, he concludes the following. We're going to play a little 10-second clip. Let's play that clip right now.
The choice we have now is between trusting banks or trusting people. Most people still hate banks, but they trust them more than their neighbor.
Now the clip just says something interesting, that people, even though they hate bankers, they trust bankers more than they do their neighbor. Now, I've got my thoughts on this, but speak a little bit about this, please.
Well, I think it's Manuel Castells, the sociologist, who's saying this, and I think that he sees from all kind of empirical research that people are losing trust in institutions, not just in financial institutions, but also in political institutions. They go to vote less, and they vote very unpredictably. They vote politicians in and out of power, but by the year they change loyalties and alliances because they don't trust institutions. But then the question is always, what is the alternative? Can we do without? Can we do without banks? Can we do without politicians? It's hard to imagine alternatives. And one of the reasons it's hard to imagine is that to rebuild a different structure means that you have to rebuild it with your neighbors or with your community and in your community. And that's not something that we've been doing much lately, most of us, especially not in this western part of the world, in Europe and in America, I think. So in a way, I think with losing trust in institutions, we should, I guess, involved in a process of rebuilding trust in each other, in our neighbors. But this is something that's going to take a long time because I think, many people have gotten out of touch with their neighbors. Most of us live in cities now, more of the half of the world population. And it's not so easy to imagine community building from the ground up. And I have been doing a new documentary in Los Angeles where you actually do see a lot of people trying. You see people starting to build new communities that are based on the idea that they don't want to depend on the system, so to say. So people buying homes that have been foreclosed for a very low price, starting urban farms, starting communes, starting living together. Child care services, shared responsibility for child care, trying to get away from using cars, using bikes more, living more locally, and eating food that is grown locally. And in a way, to me, this sounds like, going back. But in another way, it's maybe back to the future, because I think to go forward on the path that we're going, you see that very clearly in Los Angeles, it's a dead-end street. It will end. So I think those who are able to prepare themselves with alternative systems, alternative ways of living, they will be better off.
I remember a story recently of a garden, an urban garden in Compton, a ghetto in Los Angeles, that was ripped up and paved over. The government came in and destroyed it. And the government knows that if they stir up hate, that they can control the population and they can charge rent. They're rent seekers because the government is now merged with the banks, and the banks are pernicious, predatory rent seekers, and they'll do it any way that they possibly can. So it's not that people are not naturally going to gravitate toward self-sustaining communities. That's in their DNA. The problem is that you've got kleptocrats running the government in America and other countries around the world who are hell-bent on destroying any community sustainable programs. So no matter how many gardens you start, no matter how many soup kitchens and health care and community classes that you begin, you still have to deal with the Gestapo, that is the U.S. government, stormtrooping in and destroying it in your face because hatred makes money for them. They make more money on hate than anything else. So how do you deal with that?
I don't necessarily feel that's the case because I think in America, what I saw in Los Angeles, government is much less powerful over people's lives, daily lives, than it is. It's also offering less services. It's not offering very good public education. It's not offering a very good public transportation system, and people are not willing to pay more taxes to have that. But the other side of that there is more freedom, and there definitely is a possibility, I think, to cut yourself more loose from the system and to organize things the way you want. And I interviewed one woman that I think she's kind of a visionary, and she said, it's always better to apologize than to ask permission. So that's what a lot of people are doing. And as I said, it's underreported. It's not so much in the media, but a lot of people are doing this on a very large scale. They're just doing things that are verging on the illegal, that are not necessarily legal or even written up in laws. And they're just inventing new lifestyles. And it's not so easy to stormtrooper in and get rid of that. I mean, how do you know, first of all, if it's not registered, it's just starting on a very small scale and doing it. So I don't know, we have to see. It's hard to really predict how this will go and how things will react. And there is also something like, not so much the political power of the people, this is definitely not in America, but I think a kind of power of consumers and of mentality change. If people really don't trust banks and don't trust institutions, I think at some point politicians have to react and something will slowly shift, and if the politicians don't react, the people will find other ways to deal with that.
Well, I mean, there was a utopian vision once 230 years ago called America. Now it's controlled by the kleptocrats. It's all gone. And so I just see this cycle repeating again and again until you do what Iceland. I think Iceland is an interesting story, but we don't have time to talk about that today. Brekia van der Hek, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Good luck.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report. I want to thank Stacy Herbert, and I want to thank my guest, Brekia van der Hek. And until next time, this is Max Keiser wishing you... Oh, don't forget, send me an email if you want to send me one. The address is keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.